did some of your graduate work in Las Vegas. Talk a little bit about your take, sociologically, about street life in Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, if you haven't been, is a really interesting place. I think, like New York City, there are lots of sociological studies that can happen in public spaces in a place like Las Vegas. I did my master's thesis in what I called the event spaces of Las Vegas, and there are these places like Treasure Island has these two battling pirate ships that fight in this very scripted manner every hour or every half an hour or something like that. We're sitting in a hotel room that looks out onto the Bellagio pool, and at every hour or something like that there's this kind of water display. And I talked about these spaces as being, I called them event spaces because they're semi-public, semi-private spaces that these hotels are trying to draw people in through. And there's this, in the older part of Las Vegas, there's a space called Fremont Street, and they took this gorgeous street that if you drove down this street, it would just be magical to drive down and walk down this street. And U2, there's a U2, kids still listen to U2, right? U2, there's a song called Where the Streets Have No Name, and it was a video, and it's kind of the band walking through that street, Fremont Street. And now they covered it over with this balcony of lights, and you have this big display every hour, and it's really sad. And so I call that an event space. It's a destination for tourists to go in the hopes that they will then go and spend their money in the casinos. And that really was one of the first, that got me interested in public spaces and city interactions with individuals in cities.
We're sitting here in Las Vegas in a room overlooking the Strip, and we can see New York, New York. Can you talk a little bit about how and why Las Vegas has kind of made New York a theme, at least in one of the hotels?
Well, it's a particular kind of New York City that is in Las Vegas, right? It's a sanitized New York City. It's a smaller scale New York City. It's a New York City that's clearly for profit. It's clearly designed to give you the hints of New York City without any of the danger, without any of the, I think, excitement or intrigue. And I think that Las Vegas is, because I started my graduate work in Las Vegas and I moved on to New York City, I do think that there's this really interesting tension between the two cities. This one that is made almost wholly out of the sand and heavily thematized with places like the Venetian, the Paris Hotel, the Luxor Hotel, that these thematized spaces, we shouldn't forget, are a lot of fun, but they also are completely manufactured and constructed for the benefit of separating you from your money. And I think that Las Vegas is a heightened example of that, but it's also one that we shouldn't forget the lesson of when we go in other cities and in other places, in what ways places are created and constructed and thematized for our consumptive winks and nod, as a consumptive wink and nod to get us to spend time there, spend money there. And you have to think about what is then being left behind. What are the parts that are being edited out? What are the kinds of stories that are being pushed to the margins? There's a really great sociologist, his name is Kurt Bouchard, who does work on Las Vegas homelessness, and he did his dissertation here, and it was all about living and being homeless in the shadow of such extreme wealth and such extreme kind of thematizing as that kind of story of income inequalities and homelessness is being pushed to the side. And in New York, or in a place like San Francisco, those stories are able to be more brought into your narrative and your experiences. And I think that Las Vegas is one of those places that is desperately trying to get the alternative stories edited out.